He is a counter-terror instructor. Mr. Paul-Daniel Nahous is with us via Zoom. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Thank you very much for joining me. Following the crime symposium last week, the Prime Minister announced a decision taken by regional heads to actually ban the use and the importation of assault rifles. Now, there has been some confusion as to exactly what he meant. If you could just explain to us, does the Firearms Act of Trinidad and Tobago actually define what an assault weapon is, or does it even list prohibited weapons?
Yeah, well, there's a regulation, I should say a law, that there are prohibited weapons, and the Firearms Act Chapter 1601 goes on to describe what is considered a prohibited weapon. And one of the descriptions is an automatic weapon. So certain items such as automatic weapons, such as artillery, these things are prohibited for civilian use. So it's in the law already that weapons in the automatic configuration are prohibited for use outside of law enforcement and military and, well, state use in that aspect.
Well, one gun dealer, Mr. Dirk Barnes, he's suggested that there are hand rifles in the arms of civilians which resemble assault-type weapons. Is that the case? And is that perhaps what the Prime Minister was referring to?
Yes, well, you see, I mean, they do seem like what is commonly defined as an assault weapon. They do look like it cosmetically. However, you have, for example, .22 long rifle, semi-automatic firearms, which are less lethal than, in terms of caliber and ballistics, than a handgun. But cosmetically, they do look like assault weapons. They do look like the assault rifles they're speaking of. But there's no automatic configuration. And in terms of civilians who have even the higher calibers for sport purpose and so on, those are not in the automatic configuration. They're only in semi-automatic. Again, according to the Firearms Act, Chapter 1601, it is prohibited to have an automatic weapon. So there's no civilian who owns an automatic weapon for any kind of personal use. The civilians who may have automatic weapons on our premises are gun dealers who are selling to the TTPS, the TTDF, customs, and so on.
Well, the Minister of Finance, Colm Imbert, in his budget presentation last year suggested that they need to strengthen the Firearms Act with more clearly defined terms. Given what you've suggested this morning, that there are weapons in the hands of civilians that cosmetically they resemble assault-type weapons, but such weapons are already prohibited in the Act, would you agree that the existing legislative framework is not strong enough or not clearly defined in order to actually basically explain what the Prime Minister was alluding to?
Well, I will answer that in 2 points. One is that we need to update the Firearms Act, and not to update it to restrict as much as update it to be in line with what happens with modern firearms, to define certain things maybe a bit more clearly. However, again, the Act takes care of that when they speak about automatic weapons or so. There's a lot that needs to be defined in this Act to bring it into the 21st century even. There are a lot of very dated parts of the Act that I believe need updated. Now, when we talk about updating it to deal with or to address weapons that resemble assault weapons cosmetically, and so you have to ask, what sense does that make, in that when you pass legislation, you're looking to address a certain type of mischief in society, and where's the mischief being created with these legal firearms? And they're not. The fact is that the legal firearms are not being used in any violent assault or so. And if something cosmetically resembles an assault weapon and it's not being used in the commission of any crime, what is the real issue there? Because I can have an item, let's just say, that resembles an assault weapon, that is not an assault weapon, it's not automatic in the automatic configuration. However, I can have something that does not resemble an assault rifle at all, or assault weapon at all, but it has the capability of automatic fire and high caliber and a lot of penetration. So, I mean, we have to look at what is the purpose of passing law, rather than just taking the idea that, okay, something looks this way or something seems this way and is perceived as this way. Because I think this is how we ended up in this mess in the first place, is that the perception is just entirely off.
Well, everything that you've explained, the Prime Minister went on during the symposium, the closing ceremony of the symposium, to say we do not require those weapons within our society in a commonplace way because of the outcome of the presence in the society. We can continue to provide protection with a small number of handguns in the population. But the argument being put forward is that these weapons are already not in the hands of civilians, and you've also suggested that no unlawful act or robbery or murder with an assault rifle by a civilian has ever been recorded. So therefore, is this where the confusion exactly lies? The Prime Minister has made comments, the Prime Minister has made statements, but there's now a fear that citizens who may be mature enough or citizens who have already been granted an FUL could have their weapons actually confiscated from them, or even they can be charged for even possessing them.
Okay, so the thing is that becomes a technical thing in law. I'm not going to go too much into that, but basically for somebody to receive an FUL, to receive certain types of weapons, they would have had to go through a very, very strenuous and a very, let's just say tedious process, whereby you would have been examined by the police, examined by doctors, your neighbors would have been interviewed, your house checked. Then you would have to do certificate of competence program with a accredited instructor. There's a lot of steps that it takes, and a massive file has to come together at the station level, at the firearm unit level, at the divisional level, and then at the commissioner level before you are granted that. So going through all that process, it's not as simple as saying, well, okay, we're going to revoke licensed firearms. There's a legitimate expectation, and that is a legal term. There's a legitimate expectation that after going through all of this process, and having obtained it, and having spent money on weapons, on proper training, and all this type of stuff, it's not as simple as just saying, well, okay, we taking back firearms. No, there's a legitimate expectation from FUL holders that when you go through this entire process, when you're granted that, or when you have that signature of the office, not the person, but of the office, that they cannot just say, well, all right, recall firearms or take back this or that. It's going to end up in a total legal and even constitutional mess.
Well, given the mess that we're already in, given the state of the Firearms Act and no clearly defined terms, there's already concern from gun dealers throughout the nation. And will this proposed ban, should it come into effect, given current circumstances, in what ways would it affect gun dealers, if it would affect them at all?
Well, if they say they're banning automatic weapons, assault weapons, and so on, well, it doesn't affect anyone because it's already in the law as a prohibited item. The fear is that, you see, legislation can be passed, and the fear is that they broaden that type of definition to go from a professional expert definition into what they understand it as. And that is a very dangerous thing because we've seen in Parliament and we've seen in news even that they use terms such as semi-automatic, and they're referring to automatic. They are using various terms and there's no professional input into it. So where you need to research, you need to have subject matter experts comment on things. We're seeing a lack of that going on in decision making and by extension in what comes out in the media. So that ends up as a situation where they might go to Parliament and try to pass certain laws to restrict weapons that are not actually assault weapons or not considered assault weapons by experts. Yet, because of their perception and their own personal definition, their subjective opinion of it, rather than the actual objective facts, laws can get passed under that if we're not careful.
So then, also what is being suggested is the authorities, whether it be law enforcement or even those at the helm of national security, or even within government by extension, are not even aware as to what is actually being utilized, what is actually happening on the streets of Trinidad, in terms of even the types of weapons and the caliber of ammunition that is being utilized.
Yeah, I would say that there seems to be, I don't know if it's a willful ignorance or it's just, I can't really tell you what it is. But for example, the police service put out, when they confiscated a micro-Rooney kit from a criminal, which is a kit that basically converts a handgun into a shoulder-mounted weapon. It's an accessory for a weapon. And all it does is really, it's just a brace and a frame that allows you to be able to stabilize the handgun better and so on. And I'm not going to get the technical terms of that, but the police put out a release that they have seized an item that has converted a pistol into a fully automatic assault weapon and stuff, and it was absolutely not true. So if those are things coming out on media releases, official releases from places like the TTPS, where it is vested in them to have superintendents of the firearms in the country, it's a frightening thing to see that those things aren't fact-checked and that kind of misinformation is thrown to the public.
But then how does that reflect of the national security apparatus and services? If they themselves are not aware as to what is being used by criminals, is it that that's already one big, deep leap into the abyss in trying to deal with the crime situation? They may be under-resourced and have not a clue as to exactly what they're coming up against.
So I would point out that assault weapons, the persons in Trinidad and Tobago who are not military, who are not law enforcement, who have possession of assault weapons, of automatic rifles, of high caliber, those are criminals. They are criminals using these type of weapons. They're using automatic weapons, prohibited weapons. They're using weapons that civilians could never get their hands on legally, and that only law enforcement. As a matter of fact, they're using some weapons that law enforcement cannot get their hands on legally, and military, as in, or I should say, that they can't get their hands on, but they don't have their hands on. They're using advanced weapon systems. They're using autosaves to convert their handguns into automatic weapons. They put a say on the back of their illegal Glocks and illegal say, put an extended magazine, and they're firing pistols in fully automatic configurations. So that's where the quote-unquote assault weapons, that is who it's in the hands of, law enforcement, military, and criminals. And it comes down to threat assessment as well, in that if you can't assess the threat properly, how are you going to counter the threat and focus on what needs to be focused on in terms of having an efficient system and efficient methods, which reflect now, go back now to how you train law enforcement, how you train the military, how you train your personnel to combat that situation. If we are lacking in terms of that analytical capability, or I should say analytical will, I don't think we're lacking capability, but rather will, then it basically leaves the law enforcement and military to some extent, I would say less the military, more law enforcement, vulnerable to these type of threats.
So as we conclude and we speak about recommendations, you've already suggested that the legislative framework certainly needs a lot to be done in order to bring it up to par. You further suggested that the analytical, you said the capability is there, but the will needs to be there for law enforcement. That also needs to come up to par. But if we were to speak about the firearm users licenses and the process for attaining an FUL, what is that process like? You've already suggested it's a lot of documents in one folder in order to be granted your FUL. Is the process enough as it is, or does more need to be done?
So I know when Commissioner Griffith was in the hot seat, the proverbial hot seat, he had implemented some additional policies and additional checks, including a compliance unit to do checks and so on, where more was being done even to investigate persons applying for FULs. And it was actually being done in a faster time, but with more checks, because there was the will to make sure that the applications get the due attention, again, not approval, but due attention they deserve before approval. I would say that the amount of checks that they have, to some degree, are adequate. The additional policies that Mr. Griffiths had in place that I think most of them have been removed by now. I think those are good policies to have in place, and those are good checks. And it takes a number of months, to some people years, to get that done. I'm not going to go over the entire process, but basically, you need to be investigated at different levels. You need to have the the recommendation of the inspector in charge is, I believe, the CID in your division, the superintendent division. You have to go through a psychometric test. You have to go through a medical, including a marijuana and cocaine test, which is still apply. All these things are done to make sure that you are someone who they think would not misuse the license or the weaponry. I want to make another point of something as well. And this, I think, is an important point that people are not looking at. We look at the firearms. We don't look at the ammunition as much. FUL holders are actually restricted to how much ammunition they could purchase a year to carry home or to carry on person. They're actually restricted. It's not like in the U.S. The U.S. is the best example, where you can, okay, yes, there are actually restrictions on U.S. firearms. People believe there are none. There are restrictions, and they vary state by state. But a lot of states in the U.S., you can actually buy as much ammunition as you want. In Trinidad and Tobago, it's not so. Dealers have to account for the amount of ammunition they sell for persons to take off the range. So there is the limiting factor of ammunition and how it's restricted to civilians.
I think that's a very key point that you've just raised there, Mr. Nahous. Thank you very much. In terms of another suggestion is that extending the period of the provisions license from 3 months to a year. Would you see this as a benefit in order for new owners or proposed new owners to be familiarize themselves with the firearm and ammunition that they may possibly purchase?
So I don't think that is a great idea to extend it for that, simply because you don't require a year of training, one, and two, it delays the amount of time for you to actually send the documents for the signature of the commissioner for the FUL, because you need the provisional to get the certificate of competence to now get your FUL, which is another signature from the commissioner. But when you have done the provisional, you have done all the checks, everything has already been done, and you've done all the checks to be granted the FUL. The reason you have to get the provisional is to get a certificate of competence from a accredited instructor to say you're competent to use the firearm. You're given 2 months, and you cannot receive, or you should not supposed to receive, an FUL before the expiry of that provisional. And even so, it's not automatic upon the expiry. Upon the expiry of it, then the documents are sent to the commissioner for a final signature. So extending it to a year is not necessary, because you don't need a year of training to be competent in a firearm. And as a matter of fact, if you look at in the police academy, I believe they have a 40-hour program for pistols. So I mean, it's not to say that you need that level of training. You just need to be deemed competent enough to safely handle the firearm. I think what they would benefit more from is having instructors. As an instructor, I can say this, that I have a lesson plan. I have a whole program. A lot deals with legal issues with firearms. It deals with being an owner of a firearm rather than just being competent in shooting. Most of my program, the shooting is actually the smallest part of my program. Most of it is legal issues and what you need to know as a firearm holder, and how to stay out of trouble with the law, how to deal with police stops, these type of things. And I think that it would be better if that is actually defined, that these modules need to be included in a certificate of competence at the bare minimum.
Okay. Mr. Nahous, I want to thank you very much. I'm very glad we've had this conversation, so there's a better understanding as to the position as to why there is confusion over the Prime Minister's comments of banning assault weapons, given the fact that the legislative framework doesn't clearly define such terms. And also, I'm appreciative of the point that you've raised with respect to the ammunition, the type of ammunition and the amount of ammunition one can take home every year. All that is part of the issue. Just to let you know that the Minister of National Security has indicated that this decision to ban assault rifles is to prevent any mass shootings from happening within Trinidad and Tobago. So that may be one of the things that the government is hoping to try and be proactive about.
So we have mass shootings. The mass shootings are from criminals. The thing is, yes, we're looking at the U.S. context with mass shootings and so on. But remember, these are people who, some of them will access legal firearms, use it illegally. And again, with the lack of restrictions on ammunition, they're able to get access to a lot of ammunition very, very quickly. And in these large quantities also, it's a whole different society. It's a whole different context. The mass shooting situations we have in Trinidad are criminals who are using illegally obtained firearms from illegal sources to commit the crimes. It's not legal firearms being used for illegal activity. It's illegal firearms being used for illegal activity. And that's where the mass shootings are coming from. Look, the other day, we saw 9 people shot in the same day. 3 people were killed, I believe, yesterday morning or the day before in one shooting incident. I mean, 6 and 7 people have been hit in a shooting incident, and they are all from illegal firearms. So there's nothing about getting ahead. It's just that it's been taken entirely out of context. And I believe they're trying to ride the media wave a lot in terms of the hot topics in the States right now.
Well, that may be one thing, Mr. Nahous. But again, thank you for your time this morning and for the information that you've shared with us, for bringing us some level of clarity. Wishing you all the best. And who knows, given the trajectory of the proposed plans, we may have to have a further discussion sooner rather than later. But for now, thank you very much, sir.
Anytime. Thank you for having me.
All the best.